The following is intended only for mature audiences.
Open your ears and lube up your butthole. It's time for the What Do We Call It podcast. Now, here's your host. It's Jmann. Welcome to the What Do We Call It podcast. I'm Jmann.
This is Steiny.
Hello! So you've met my mom twice.
Yeah.
The day you helped me move into the house here, which was 11 years ago, and then at my wedding in 2017.
There was more times than that.
Was there?
Your birthday parties for the girls, she was here. There's been a couple times at your parents' house I had either stopped by or met you over there for something. Yeah.
Okay, so when I tell people that she's fucking insane...
I don't argue.
Okay.
I've got enough of a barometer, I think, to be able to understand where you're coming from, because she's unique when you get around her in that she's kind of always talking, making noise, and always telling an opinion, right?
Yeah, she basically never shuts the fuck up.
Okay, yeah, that's what I remember.
She is like the arcade machine that your neighbor has in his garage, and then he has the fucking door for the quarter thing open, so you can just push the credit button.
Oh, yeah.
She's unlimited fucking plays, is what she is. The reason I bring her up is over the years, I've told stories about things that have gone on that made me feel disrespected, like she was overbearing, like she shit on all of my dreams to make them seem not just unobtainable, but almost silly.
Sure.
To dissuade me.
For reference, Jmann wanted to quit cop school and instead pursue music production, and she said it was a waste of money. He wanted to train to be a pro wrestling manager, not a wrestler, the guy who escorts the wrestlers to the ring and speaks for them. She told him he would get paralyzed. He joined a band and there was talk of a mini tour down south, and she said if they didn't have any songs on the radio they weren't a real band. Comedy was a waste of time, and she never encouraged him to try stand-up, despite him mentioning repeatedly how many people thought he should do it.
And I've described her as an emotional terrorist.
Yes.
There are multiple stories of her threatening to kick him out of the house for things like quitting Catholicism, cutting his hair to his preference for his senior pictures, when he got an eyebrow ring. Various other times when she told him that he needed to obey her rules or she would emancipate him and he could live out on the street. When she found out he was going to be a father and threw a sad tantrum, or the comments about cockroaches she made when he stated he was going to move out and get an apartment. Also, there's all the times she got way too mad over simple things, like a spilled bowl of soup or a cabinet door that was inadvertently shut in another door, and she went on a 5-minute tirade about seeking a divorce and leaving Jmann with his dad and taking his sister and being just fine without them. There are literally hundreds of examples of her bitchery, but we don't have all day to revisit the past. You'll just have to take him at his word that she is Hitler with a vagina.
She's not just a cunt. She's mentally ill. My therapist has said as much. He's like, oh no, I don't doubt that she's got a number of things wrong with her, but she's never going to know because she's not going to be the person that comes in at her age from that generation and asks for anybody to diagnose her. Because she, like you say, never says the words, I was wrong or I'm sorry.
And she was never a supportive parent.
No. If you ask her, she was always there for me. And one time I started a fucking war of words when I said to her, I'm like, you were a supportive parent financially. She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, emotionally, you were a fucking basket case. And I never felt safe. And it was not okay to disagree with you in this house. Oh my God, you're a fucking tyrant. How do you not see that? She did not accept that well.
Well, yeah. Especially like you said, she's not going to see any side of it at this age. Any other side of it, I mean.
My point here is, over the years, I've told some of these stories. And some of them, part of it is I'm a good storyteller. I know how to emphasize the best bullet points to get more bang for your buck. Now, I would never exaggerate the details of anything, because I know that's how you instantly lose credibility with anyone. And I'm not telling stories just to get laughs. I'm telling stories so you understand why I am the way I am, because of what I've been through.
Right. Well, and like you say, sometimes there's comedic beauty in just how effed up this situation was. Let me tell you about this, you know.
Yeah, and to try to see the humor in it is therapeutic because you're trying to make sense of something that is so unnerving at times. Now, here's the point. There have been people and that I've known close that have been like, well, it can't be that bad. Or be like, hey, don't talk about your mom like that. I even had inmates when I mentioned a few stories they overheard when I was like in a work crew and I just, share shit.
Sure.
I'm like, have you ever wondered why I am how I am? This is part of why. And there'd be people like, hey, that's your mom.
Right.
And here's why that's such a middle finger. Because I'm telling you about my personal experience. The good and the bad. Now, the bad outweighs the good about 25-1, honestly. That's no exaggeration. Yeah. If I were to tell all the most popular stories about my mom, 2 of them involve shit. The remainder of them involve her scolding me in unbelievably stupid and just incredulous ways. And it's so fucking offensive to have somebody that doesn't know your story, other than how you're telling it to them, doubt you right out of the gate. And maybe it's because, no one would be that fucking crazy, because let's be honest, she's a special breed. So if you hear enough of the stories, you start to go, no fucking way. I don't know anybody whose parent is like that. And I've had friends say, I don't know any mom that yelled at their kid and swore at their kid the way she did to you.
Well, because it was unique, right? Same with those people who don't want to believe it right away. They're probably projecting their, version of their mom onto you and thinking, oh, your mom, right? Why would you say that about your mom? Well, you didn't have the same mom.
Yeah. So, for instance, my wife, when she met her back in the year 2000, she's told me, in the past few years, I was scared shitless of your mom. She would yell and swear at you. And it was uncomfortable to see her flip out because she did not have any sense of propriety about controlling her anger and hiding how she felt. So she clearly has boundary issues and impulse control issues. God damn you! And even my aunt, her sister, who's my godmother, has said to me recently, I know it was tough growing up in that house. I get why you don't want to have a relationship with her. And that part of the conversation came after her just asking me, how are things between you and your mom? And I'm like, well, I don't talk to her, and that seems to work.
Yeah.
And she laughed her ass off, and she's like, well, I don't mean to laugh. I'm like, no, it's okay, because it's an absurd concept that other people would be like, you have to avoid your mom to have a good relationship? Yes. She is fucking battery acid inside of a 300-pound, 4'10" frame. And all she does is fucking sting you like a 9-volt on your tongue. It's fucking terrible. So now, when people doubt me, like you said, my mom is not your mom. I have a friend or a guy I know, his mom died. Oh. That was a big deal for him. I had another friend from high school. His mom died. That was a big deal for him. So each of them, when I badmouth my mom, they have a problem with it.
Because at least you have a mom.
Yeah. And that's so shitty to turn it into a comparative statement like, well, your mom's still alive. You should be thankful. Like, hey, do you think the people that didn't get gas chambered the first week at Auschwitz were like, well, at least we're still alive. We're starving. They shaved our heads. They tattooed us so they know who we are. And they're basically killing us slowly with manual labor. But hey, at least we didn't die right away. Like, what a dumb fucking statement. And maybe that comparison is a bit hyperbolic. But imagine a sexual assault advocate saying to some woman well, hey, at least he only fucked you in the pussy and he didn't tear your asshole up. Because that could have been a whole world of new injuries and possibly, STDs in your butthole. Yeah. Nobody wants to be like, well, hey, it's not so bad. Because it fucking sucks. This shit haunts me. To be a 40-year-old man telling these stories to a 50-something-year-old man, or maybe he's 60, I don't fucking know. He was in Desert Storm, so he was in his 20s then, in 91.
Yeah.
So 30 years. He's in his 50s. And I tell him this, and he shakes his head or he laughs. He's like, Jesus. Yeah. My therapist, whose job it is to talk to people with fucked up lives, here's the stories about Linda. And he's like, wow, that's messed up. Like, what the fuck? And people that have the audacity to be like, well, that's your mom. Just because you gave me life does not mean you have a free pass until your casket drops to be an unimaginable amount of cunt all the time. And I have to be like, well, you guys, I mean, she did tell me that it was fucking stupid to want to quit cop school when I was so close to the end because my heart wasn't in it anymore. But I have to listen to her because she gave me life. Like, fuck you 1,000,000 times with a Pringles can-sized dildo with no lubricant.
Ow.
That's such horse shit. Like, I want you to think about, like, your dad, right?
Yep.
Not around.
Well, no, he was not.
Your biological father.
No. And then he was killed in an accident when I was like 12, 13 years old.
Yeah. So imagine if you were telling somebody that, and they're like, well, yeah, but you have a stepdad, right? So at least you have a dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
How would you fucking react to that?
As great as my stepdad was, he still wasn't my biological father. And in some ways, back then, you were raised thinking, what was wrong with me? Why didn't he want to be around? And stuff like that. There was issues, of course, you're going to have from that. And yeah, at least you have a dad type thing. It's like, well, yeah, that's true. That assumes having a bad mom is still better than having no mom at all.
Is it?
Right. I don't understand. That's a false argument. That's one that comes from perspective, right? And that's only a point. Like, at what point do you say, well, okay, I guess it would be worse to have a bad mom than no mom at all? Because there is a point for everybody, right? If your mom's burning your genitals and giving you cigarette burns as a baby, you know what? I think I'd rather have no mom, right? If mom was emotional terrorist my entire youth growing up, I'd almost want no mom instead of the mom that would treat me like that, right? You know what I mean? You got to have perspective.
Well, I remember, I think it was an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. They were trying to figure out what happened to this girl. And there was a younger sister, and there was an older sister. The older sister got to be a teenager, and she was skinny and pretty. And her mom used to lock her in a closet and tell her no one's ever going to love you because you dress like a whore. And she'd make her eat macaroni and cheese with fucking lard in it every night to try to fatten her up.
Oh, jeez.
Because the mom clearly fucking hated herself.
Yeah.
Right? And then that girl died. So I want you to think about, if you're a teenage girl and you have a mom who tells you you dress like a whore, or you only hang out with shitty people, or your music's fucking stupid, you're going to not like that woman. And you're like, oh, okay, let's go a step further. Ivy, her mom, drug addict, off and on her whole life. Their house burned down at points, fucking drug dealers around, all kinds of shit. Plus her dad's kind of an elkie. Now, you could say, well, at least you have a mom. But I have to believe at some point, as much as she still somehow finds a way to love that woman. And addiction is a little bit different than beating the fuck out of you. Or, sitting idly by while you know that mom's boyfriend is like raping the daughter. It'd almost be better to have a dead mom than have a shitty mom.
Yeah.
It's better to have no car and ride the bus than it is to have a piece of shit car that costs you money all the time to fix, and it breaks down and you lose your job because of it. It's almost better to die in war than come home and have a Purple Heart pinned to your chest while you're sitting there with a fucking hook for a hand. Or your face is burned off.
You can't walk because you're paralyzed from the waist down.
So what I'm driving at is, if you're going to be sensitive, which is important, because when we talk to other people, we're trying to relate. That's the human experience. What you live, what I live, we discuss it with each other, we relate to each other, we draw perspective from the differences in our upbringings.
Oh, yeah.
And you could go to a fucking airport and sit there waiting to get on a goddamn sky missile there and talk to somebody from the opposite side of the world and hear their points of views. And that's the human experience.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do that, it would probably behoove you to not instantly be dismissive or shit on the perspective of that person. Yes, I can see why, if what they're saying seems hyperbolic or grandiose, or they're only speaking in superlatives, They're the worst. It's the worst. They're the best. It's the
Right.
greatest. You know, like Trump does.
Right. Yeah.
My mom does that shit too. Everything's the fucking worst.
Oh.
Weeping willows are the worst kind of tree to have, and pit bulls are the worst kind of dog to have.
Sure.
And Jägermeister was the worst thing I could have drank back when I used to drink. He's fucking terrible. Everything's the worst. You're going to sit there and be like, come on. What the fuck? Where's the middle of the road here?
Right.
I get that.
Or you just get dismissive of their point of view because it's like, yeah, you don't take it as any weighted, right? When everything's the best or the worst.
But especially if you sit and listen and you hear them out.
Yep.
And then at the end, you're like, no way. Like, oh, come on. Look on the bright side. Really? Imagine telling any of the kids who got butt-fucked by Jerry Sandusky in the showers at goddamn Penn State or in the basement of his home while his wife was upstairs making cookies and burying her head in the sand. Tell those kids, like, well, come on. You got fucked in the ass by an old man with a dirty dick, and it probably hurt and was embarrassing and scarred you for life, but how many Nittany Lion football games did you get to go
I was
to?
going to say, you were part of the booster club, right?
I mean, fucking A.
So really, it's kind of a wash, right? Wouldn't you say? No, not at all.
Yeah, like any altar boy that got fucking touched by a priest. Like, now I know it's not cool that you know what an old man's dick and cum tastes like, but think about that he chose you out of all the kids in that parish, and then you're going to get to heaven and God's going to be like, hey, you took one for the team, so you are front of the line for who gets their next fucking wings and halo, bud.
So, just a little side note, not sure if you want to, where you want to put this here. I'll just preface it. So here's a little Linda story. Going back to your wedding, one of the memories that my wife and I still have is we were sitting around, I believe it was the reception, we were all kind of eating afterward, and your mom came by. I think you actually had stopped by and you were chatting with us, and then your mom came by to talk about something, and she was just talking about random stuff and getting all worked up about all this stuff she had to do when she had no responsibilities that day and all this other stuff. And my wife and I just really kind of looked at each other and just, she looked at me questioningly, and I go, it's a thing. It's her. Like, it's just Linda, right?
Yeah.
Like, she was just all over the place. And granted, you could chalk it up to maybe being the wedding, but it was like, no, that's her all the time.
No, she's fucking neurotic as all get out.
Yep.
You know? So I'm not going to continue to like harp on people when they do this. I hate to say I've grown accustomed to it because it comes with the territory of having a fucked up upbringing where people are like, hang on, what?
Yeah.
It's okay to second thought what I'm saying, but really hear me out. And let's subtract me from the equation. The next time somebody sits and tells you about their fucked up upbringing, I don't mean some dipshit Gen Zer who is pissed off and is like, I'm tired of dating narcissists. Because that's a whole nother fucking episode where I break down that NPD is actually extremely rare and you're just a stupid bitch who needs a thesaurus in your fucking Christmas stocking. But hear people out. Don't play that, oh, it's not so bad game. If someone's going to make themselves vulnerable to you and belch out their feelings like that, don't be that person. Don't be, well, it's not so bad. Come on, buck up. Like, go give yourself a fucking 12-gauge enema.
A lot of people don't understand that the talking about it is the therapy, and you can't fix it, and you're not there to fix it by giving them a, hey, pat on the back.
Yeah, I'm just trying to feel better about it by like relating to people so they get me.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily looking for validation.
Right.
But I guess the more important point that I'm trying to emphasize here is that being somebody's parent does not make it okay to treat them like shit because you're in a position of authority.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times my mother made me feel unsafe, unloved, uncared for, and like I didn't want to live in that goddamn house anymore. And that is not how a parent should make a child feel. And anybody that sits there and is like, well, that's your mom, that's not okay. Being my mom doesn't make it okay for her to have been so fucking verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, and to make me just feel unwanted and unwelcome and uncomfortable all the time.
Right.
You're just reopening all those old wounds and being overtly dismissive of all of the pain and the heartache and the struggle and the trauma that I went through. It's not okay for parents to treat their kids that way, and being a parent in and of itself does not mean that you have the right to lord over your children in ways that could get them taken away from you if they really started talking to the right people about it.
Yeah.
Like, it is unbelievably triggering and super fucked up to insinuate that it's no big deal just because she was my mother.
Keep that shit up, you're gonna be out of here!
Interact with the show on Twitter at What Do We Call It. That is at What Do We Call It. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/group/What Do We Call It podcast show. For the What Do We Call It podcast, I'm Jmann.
This is Steiny.
And that's the end.